Hello, Aubrey. How's it going? Happy Friday. We are recording today on a Friday, which is awesome.
Yes, happy Friday. Are you excited for the weekend?
I am excited. I don't know when this is coming out, but anyways, there's always a Friday coming around the corner at some point
Right,
for
absolutely.
everyone.
Yes. Okay, I have a question for you. I'm
Okay.
wondering, are you good at budgeting?
Ooh, I don't really, not really. I don't have an accounting mind. I just kind of look at what's left in my account and act accordingly. I
Mhm.
don't really, no, I
Well,
don't
what
really
about,
budget.
so follow-up question, when you have a big trip coming up, do you sort of budget better, kind of save money because you know you have an expensive trip coming up or not?
Um, Sometimes it's more about the trip itself. I try to do things on the trip to kind of save money, right? I like to do a
Mm,
blend. Like one day we'll try to do a nice hotel, other day a cheap Airbnb, another day maybe a hostel or kind of sometimes.
gotcha.
So
Interesting.
mix it up. So it's not 100% luxury, it's not 100% backpacking, it's somewhere in between. So the
Gotcha.
trip ends up being hopefully more affordable.
Yes,
You know, does that make
absolutely.
sense?
So
Yeah,
it's a little more sort of a holistic approach to it, right? Where
it
it's
is
not like you have
holistic.
a
Yeah.
spreadsheet and you're like, this is the
No,
amount of money we have and we can't
no,
go over that, but it's
that
a
is
little
not my
more
personality.
generally trying to save.
Yeah, my in-laws, so another couple, they do that, and my partner and I think about that, we're like, "We'll never be those people. We just won't. We're just
It's
not
not me
organized
either.
enough. It's not
I'm
our
not organized
personality."
enough.
No. Yeah,
So
you don't do it
interesting.
either? No.
No, and this is going to be a really interesting conversation today because I recently discovered something that I did not know, and here I am, 45 years old almost. And
Mm,
you sort of start thinking you have sort of a good idea of a lot of places in the world, and then every now and then something happens that you're just like, oh, there's a lot I still don't know. So, and
interesting.
this
That's a
has to do
great
with
feeling, isn't it? I think
budgeting
that's a
in
great
other
feeling.
cultures. I do too. Yeah, it's good to always be learning new things, right?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so what did you learn? Now we're ready. We're ready
Yes,
to
let's dive
hear.
in. Okay, so I taught a class recently to a student, and she asked not to be named, so anonymous student. But she was mentioning that in the culture that she grew up in, the concept of budgeting, like it is in the culture in the U.S., is very different, almost non-existent. For
Huh.
her growing up, it was something that's just for governments to create a budget that they stay in. And now that she's here in the US, she sees that families will have a budget, individuals will have a budget. And
Ah,
this is very foreign to her, but she really appreciated it. She's like, I can see why this is so good for kids to learn about budgeting at a young age. And
interesting.
I asked lots of follow up questions because this was a very new idea to me. And she was sort of saying that in her culture, any extra, basically all money goes to food and anything extra is saved to pass on to the next generation. And I
Mm,
said, what about travel? She sort of said, travel's a luxury expense. It's actually
yeah.
very rare. And then she
Mhm.
just said, children, families, they don't really budget. This concept doesn't even really exist and was surprising to her when she came to the US. And I found
Ooh,
that so fascinating.
that is super fascinating. This opens up a whole host of topics here that we could go into, Aubrey, right? Another day. Inheritance and how
Yeah.
Americans look at inheritance. I think increasingly our society is kind of frowning on inheritance, tax savings, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Passing money down. And we're
It's
also
it's
right.
very it's very
Yeah,
fraught, right? This is a
it's
conversation
fraught.
that is fraught, meaning
It's super
lots of people
political.
have varying opinions. People aren't always going to agree, and it can
Yes.
be because if you think about someone whose parents have a lot of wealth, if they're
Yes.
not planning on passing that on to their children, there could be a lot of emotions involved.
Oh my gosh. And there's a whole range of opinions on that. And that's one topic we could go into another day. And then another topic that comes to mind is we're on the cusp of the debt ceiling in the American government right now. They are working on a negotiation to increase the debt ceiling. If they don't, there's going to be a massive problem. By the time this comes
Yes,
out, we'll know whether or not they did. I'm going to trust that they will, but I'm nervous. I've been following, I'm
I
not
am
freaking
nervous.
out, but I've been checking the headlines like, are they closer? Because now they have to bring it to Congress for a vote. So, anyways, debt affects all of us in different ways between government and families and just life. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And we've all known someone who is either not good at budgeting or just sort of is more comfortable with debt, who ends up with maybe a lot of credit card debt and
Ooh.
becomes in a situation that is difficult to get out of, that is problematic. And so whether you're budgeting or not, which we're going to talk about, what is that budgeting? We're going to share a lot of interesting vocabulary here. It can be scary. there's the potential to get in a lot of debt like our country has, either as an individual or as a country.
Oh my gosh, this is one thing I really wish our country would implement better education at a very young age around good debt and bad debt, because there is good
Yes.
debt. Like you can leverage that debt and actually, put it to good use. And then there's credit card debt, which can be crippling. And I think kids come out of high school, even college, and have no idea about these things. It's crazy.
Yes, and I've known people who, they'll get a mortgage with like a not a
Ooh, a
fixed
balloon
APR
mortgage?
that's
Yes.
yeah, right, that becomes
Mm.
very
Variable rate. Yeah.
yes, right, a variable rate, and it becomes burdensome at some point when it changes, and then they're struggling, and most of it's just lack of education. They didn't realize what they were signing up for.
Well, that's how the entire global financial collapse happened in
Right.
2008 due to those balloon mortgages, right? People signed up for mortgages, they were kind of hunted down. It was a predatory lending situation
Yes,
where
absolutely.
people were saying anyone can buy a house, you can buy a house, no money down, but they didn't necessarily know that the rate was going to go up as soon as interest rates went up. And then it just created a huge global collapse.
Yes.
So
If you wanna
crazy.
watch a really interesting film that went into exactly how that happened, watch The Big Short. Did you watch that, Lindsay?
Oh, I've never seen that one. Interesting.
It's about
Okay.
that exactly, and it really covers I mean, it is, a dramatization, but covering very closely how that happened, who was creating those loans and who was buying them, and then who was packaging them to sell at high risk, and what it did to the economy, and who got rich from it that shouldn't have, and very
It's
fascinating.
It's also interesting to see all the other players that were involved. You said, who got
Yes.
rich, there's a documentary on Netflix right now about Bernie Madoff. And that also went down. He ended up being convicted right around the time, of course, his whole
Right.
pyramid scheme collapsed exactly when the global economy collapsed naturally. So you see all these stories, and hopefully we can learn from history.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so we want to share a couple of related episodes, and then we're going to go into some vocabulary about budgeting. And we
Mhm.
definitely want to know, what's this like in your culture? Is it more similar to our student who was like, that doesn't really exist except for governments in my culture? Or is it more like the US or somewhere in between? So come back to YouTube, leave a comment on the YouTube video. We would
Yes.
love to hear what it's like for you in your country.
Yeah, I love that idea. And before we get further into this episode, Aubrey, we should remind our listeners to hit follow on the All Ears English podcast. Why should they do that?
Yes, guys, 4 episodes every week, and they're always full of great vocabulary, interesting cultural discussions like this one. You don't want to miss any of these episodes, so be sure to hit follow wherever you find your podcast to All Ears
Yes,
English.
I love it. All right. So, what's next, Aubrey? Where are we going from here?
All right, I just want to share a couple of related episodes. If you missed it, we interviewed a Fortune 50 business consultant, Melanie Parrish, and she's a budgeting expert. So you can go on our blog, search her name, look for the old podcasts. Like, that was really interesting. And
Mhm.
also, over on the IELTS Energy podcast, we had a really great episode with vocabulary related to this. It was episode 826. It was called Avoid Being a Cheapskate with this Band 9 vocabulary. But it's not just vocabulary for IELTS. Any conversation you're having about money or trying to save money, you could really use this interesting vocabulary. So make sure you're also following the IELTS Energy podcast.
Yeah, you and Jessica are over there twice a week talking about how to pass IELTS, but also, like you said, how to get amazing vocabulary into your everyday conversations. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
Okay, let's give our listeners some real tangible vocabulary to come away with today. Where are we going to start today?
So let's just start with the noun budget, which also is a verb. We'll get to that in a second. But as a noun, it means an estimate of income and expenses or expenditure for a set period of time.
Yeah. So, for example, how do we use this in conversation? What's your budget? Very common, right?
Yeah, it means, how much money are you planning to spend? How much money do you have to spend on this? You'll hear this a lot when people want to maybe remodel or buy a car. The salesperson might say, "What's your budget?" Meaning, how much money do you have to spend?
Right. And you'll also say this being said between companies, B2B, in a sales situation.
Yes.
What's your advertising budget in Q3? Right. That's how you know what products to present to someone, right? Yes.
Exactly. Or as a person, you might say, "I'm not good at staying within a budget." And what that
Mhm.
means is, if you decide, I have $500 to spend on groceries in the month, if you are spending 1,000 every month, you're not staying within the budget, meaning you're not
Definitely
staying
not.
within the set amount of money that you had decided to spend.
Okay. And now in the next one, we're taking budget and making it a verb. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So either
Mm.
budget to budget as a verb or budgeting, right, as a present continuous verb. And this means to allow or provide a particular amount of money in a budget, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I could ask you again, are you good at budgeting? Right.
Yeah, and that's where you're using this present continuous verb. It's not about staying in the noun budget, it's the verb. Are you good at doing that?
Ooh, I love it when our listeners are able to take one word and use it in so many different ways, right? That is a sign of high level fluency, don't you think?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, right? And this one, it will come up if this is an interesting thing to ask people about. We don't really talk about money all that much, but as like the conversation I had with my student, it is an interesting thing to talk about as far as a culture or a country, right? So you might not ask someone specifically, what's your budget? Can you stay in a budget? But you might ask them, what's this like in your culture? Do people set a budget?
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that as the most approachable way to go into this topic broadly,
Hmm.
societal, like how do people in your culture budget and even talking about your personal like abilities. But what we want to avoid, at least in American culture, is saying, how much money do you have?
Exactly, right.
Right,
Unless we're a salesperson who's ready to be direct, we're probably
yeah.
not gonna say, "What's your budget?"
Yeah, we don't talk about how much we and this might not be true everywhere, right?
Right,
It might not be true. We don't really talk about how much money we have in our bank accounts. It's definitely a faux pas in conversation. Okay, that's really important to say. Okay, very
absolutely.
specific.
And
Yeah.
then there's this phrasal verb, budget in, which means to fit into a budget, right? So if, for example, you're going on a vacation to somewhere and you wanna say, "Can we budget in a vacation to Bali?" Means like,
Oh.
can we fit that expensive trip into the budget we have set?
Oh my gosh, I would love to go to Bali.
I know I've never been, but I've always wanted to go.
Maybe we can find it in the budget dollars English. Let's
Oh,
see.
no, let's here's hoping. That's a little bit of a pie in the sky idea, but I like it. Aim high.
Yeah, for sure. All right, what would be the next one?
Okay, so it's discretionary income. And this is where I was talking with my student about, what do you do with your discretionary income? And this is extra income after expenses are met. And
Yes.
in their culture, they save it for the next generation. Other people spend it
Interesting.
on travel or cars or, toys, boats, whatever.
Yeah, that's fascinating. How cultures look at spending, how
Hmm.
cultures look at what's really important when you have that extra amount of money. Like, what is a life well lived by different
Right.
cultural perspectives? Is it having this money
Exactly.
to pass on? Is it having travel experiences? Is it having tons of homes? Right?
Right. It's fascinating how it's so different depending on the family you're raised in and the culture you live in. And yeah, there's no right or wrong, just different.
Right. For sure. For sure. So I don't have a lot of discretionary income these days. And then what?
And it's funny, it didn't sound like a sample sentence. It sounded like you were talking about yourself.
Oh, no.
That was an example sentence. We don't know if that's true or not about Lindsay, guys.
That's hilarious. I'm just so natural in my examples, Aubrey. I'm
Right?
just so natural.
Impressive. Yes, that's something you could say like, "Ooh, I don't have a lot of discretionary income," which means don't have a lot of extra funds these days, right? And most of what I'm making is going toward our basic necessities. Or you might
Yes.
say, "What is your favorite thing to do with discretionary income?" And then you're asking people, "What are your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun?"
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well that this term discretionary spending is also being used right now in the budget negotiations for the debt ceiling. So,
Mm,
for our listeners who are interested in government, I'm sure some of you guys are, or economics, that's on the table right now as a negotiating piece, right? And what they call discretionary spending is military spending. It's kind of things that the government chooses to spend money on. They're debating around should they add work requirements or more work requirements when people get food stamps or get government support. So
ah.
these are discretionary pieces that the government decides to spend money on. It's one of the negotiating pieces.
Oh,
That's
man.
interesting.
Yes,
Yeah,
so interesting. A lot to read about in the news, a lot to think about, and great things to start up conversations about. They're all really interesting things to think about.
for sure. And then luxury expense. I like this, right? Something that's purchased with, again, there's that word discretionary income. So high level.
Exactly, right? So
Aubrey,
this is a
yeah.
sorry, I was just gonna say this is a noun phrase where, like, this is what you buy with that discretionary income.
Yes. Yeah. I was just going to note that that word discretionary could be super high level in IELTS, don't you think? Would that give us a 7, 8, something
Yes.
like
No,
that?
that's a band 9 word for sure.
Mm,
I don't think I've ever heard a student say it. And this is what's interesting is the way examiners determine how high of a level a word is how often they hear students say it.
I
Because
love
even
that.
longer words that sound impressive, if every student says it all the
Mm,
time, it's still band 6, right? But
yeah.
discretionary income, I don't know if I've ever heard a student say that. So that's band 9.
Interesting. Unless, of course, all of our listeners go and take IELTS this weekend in that case.
Even then, right? You're not all taking it at the same testing center, so you're still safe.
That's true. I love it. I love it. So let's see what else. For luxury expense, do we do all the examples here?
No, not yet. So you might say, like my student did, she said travel is a luxury expense. So it's very rare that people buy that. They would save money instead.
Yes. Or I've always wanted a diamond bracelet, but it is quite the luxury expense. It's quite, and I'm putting real emphasis on
Mhm.
quite there.
Yes, right. You're emphasizing how expensive that is and why you probably you haven't bought it yet. I've always wanted one, but it's quite the luxury expense. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. And do we have a quick role play? Looks like we're running out of time for today.
Yeah,
So
let's
maybe
do a role
we'll
play.
jump to the
Jump
role
into it.
play. All right.
So in this role play, we are meeting about the budget for a conference we are planning. I'll start us out.
Okay.
Okay, so now that we have the budget, we can figure out what we need to cut from the ideas we brainstormed last week.
Yeah, I think the open bar is a luxury expense that isn't going to fly.
I'd foot the bill for that myself, but I don't have that kind of discretionary income.
I do think we can budget in 2 drink tickets per person. What do you think?
Great idea. Let's plan on that.
All right, very nice. Yes, there's nothing like, having a certain amount of money and then that makes decisions very clear, right?
Yes, exactly.
When you
Like
do
we've
have a
got a certain
budget.
amount of money. You got to
Yeah.
stay within it. Exactly. So first I said, now that we have the budget, using it as a noun, that first way we taught it, right? We have the set amount of money we're allowed to spend on this.
And then I said, yeah, I think the open bar is a luxury expense that isn't going to fly. Really good bonus. We might have that in the app highlighted as a bonus word.
Mhm.
What does
Means
that
it's
mean,
not
Aubrey?
going to work. It will not be approved.
Yeah, I love that
We can't fit
expression.
it into the budget.
Won't fly. I love it. Such a natural expression. So
Yes.
good.
And then
Yeah.
another fun idiom I said, I'd foot the bill for that myself, meaning I would provide the funds. I would pay for that
Mm,
myself, but I don't have that kind of discretionary income. Open
yes.
bar, I don't want to pay for an open
Open
bar.
bar. That could be very
It could
expensive.
be
Yeah.
very expensive, especially for a really big event. Woo.
Oh my gosh, for sure. I love how our listeners are getting some good idioms today as well as this vocab. It's really good.
Mhm.
And then
Absolutely.
again, I used it as a verb in the last piece, right? I do think we can budget in 2 drinks per person. Yeah?
Yes,
Budget in.
exactly.
Yeah.
So interesting. This guy's learning about how different cultures feel about and discuss budgeting really opens your perspective. That's what it did for me. It really opened my worldview. I think I can be a little American centric sometimes, right? Where I
Oh,
sort of
interesting.
assume something like budgeting is the same everywhere as it is for me, as it is here. And I need to remember, I think it's so great to have people in my life, students, you guys out there
Yeah.
that can help me see that thing, a lot of even something like this is different all over the world.
Oh my gosh, it's true. It's true. We have to know that. We have to know that our way is just one way of thinking
Exactly.
about a life
Yeah.
well lived or success or what should be done with money. There's so many ways to think about it. Thanks for bringing this topic today, Aubrey. Really good.
Yes. Thank you. I loved it. Thanks for chatting with me. So fun.
All right, guys, hit follow on the podcast right now if you love our style, which is a focus on connection, not perfection. All right, I'll talk to you very soon. Take care, Aubrey.
Bye bye.
Bye.